The very last thing I remember before the lethal combination of 4 venti cold brews and a 200-page maxillofacial surgical thesis sent my heart into a fatal rhythm wasn't the pain of cardiac arrest. It was pure, unadulterated annoyance. I hadn't even hit save on my final chapter. 1 second, I was Luke, a 26-year-old exhausted dental resident in New York whose diet consisted entirely of sodium-heavy instant ramen and hospital cafeteria coffee. My greatest achievement in life was extracting a heavily decayed molar in under 3 minutes without breaking the root. The next second, I woke up face down on a pristine hand-woven Persian rug that probably cost more than my entire medical school tuition. My head throbbed, but not from the caffeine overdose. It throbbed because the air in the room was literally vibrating with the sound of a very expensive, very heavy crystal decanter shattering against a marble wall. Useless. Every single one of you is absolutely useless. I blinked slowly, pushing myself up off the floor. I wasn't in my cramped, mold-infested apartment anymore. I was in a ridiculously lavish penthouse that screamed old money and questionable tax returns with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan. But the view wasn't what caught my attention. It was the absolute circus happening in the center of the room. A line of middle-aged men in pristine white lab coats who looked suspiciously like the elite surgical board of Mount Sinai were kneeling on the floor, trembling like wet chihuahuas. Standing over them was a man who looked like he had stepped straight out of a GQ magazine and a Mafia blockbuster simultaneously. This had to be Arthur Blackwood. Even without the sudden influx of my new host body's memories hitting my brain, I would have recognized the archetype. He was tall, obscenely handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and radiating an aura that practically demanded you hand over your life savings. He was the ultimate ruthless billionaire mafia boss of the underworld. And right now, the most terrifying man in New York was throwing a massive tantrum. Arthur was clutching the right side of his face, his dark eyes bloodshot and wild. He paced back and forth like a caged panther, one hand gripping a silver-plated revolver that he was casually waving at the cowering medical professionals. "I pay you millions of dollars a year," Arthur roared, his voice dangerously hoarse. "And you're telling me that this agony splitting my skull in half is an untreatable curse, a hex from the rival family. Are you doctors or medieval peasants?" The head surgeon, a man with 3 PhDs, actually sobbed. "Boss, please. We've done MRI scans, CT scans, blood work. There is no tumor. There is no physiological anomaly. The pain is idiopathic. It must be a supernatural affliction. The Vidiello family must have hired a witch." I stared at the surgeon in absolute disbelief. A witch? A supernatural affliction? Was I transmigrated into an underworld mafia romance novel or a cheap fantasy spoof? I shifted my gaze back to the fearsome Arthur Blackwood. I didn't look at his tailored Armani suit, his menacing gun, or his terrifying glare. I looked at his face, specifically his jawline. As a man who had stared into thousands of mouths, my diagnostic instincts kicked in immediately. His right cheek was visibly swollen, altering the perfect symmetry of his face. The skin around the jaw angle was slightly flushed. The way he was holding his head, the difficulty he had when he opened his mouth to shout the localized inflammation. A curse. A hexa brain tumor. I felt a vein pop in my forehead. The sheer staggering incompetence of these so-called elite doctors was more offensive to me than the fact that I had just died and reincarnated into a fictional universe. "If you can't fix this," Arthur snarled, clicking the hammer of his revolver back with a chilling metallic sound. He aimed it directly at the head surgeon. "Then I'm going to have my men fit you all for cement shoes and toss you into the Hudson River. You have exactly 1 minute to find a cure." The room descended into pure panic. Bodyguards in black suits stepped forward. The doctors started begging for their lives. The tension was suffocating. Someone was about to die. And as a newly minted background character who was currently wearing a wrinkled medical assistant uniform, I was definitely going to be collateral damage. Arthur raised the gun. The surgeon squeezed his eyes shut. "Oh, for the love of God, put the gun down." The shout tore out of my throat before my brain could stop it. The entire penthouse fell into a dead, horrifying silence. The bodyguards froze. The elite doctors turned to look at me as if I had just grown a second head. Arthur Blackwood slowly turned his bloodshot, murderous gaze toward me. I stood up, dusting off my uniform, suddenly armed with the reckless courage of a man who was already dead once and had absolutely zero patience for medical stupidity. "Who the hell are you?" Arthur growled, his voice dropping an octave, the gun now aimed squarely at my chest. I ignored the weapon. I pointed a perfectly sanitized metaphorical finger right at his handsome, swollen face. "I'm the guy who's going to save you from throwing a tantrum over nothing," I said, my voice dripping with exasperated professionalism. "You are not cursed, boss. You don't have a brain tumor. You are literally just growing a stupid impacted wisdom tooth, and you have severe pericoronitis. Now sit down in a chair, open your mouth, and let me do my actual job, or go ahead and shoot me so I can go back to sleep." Arthur stared at me. The gun wavered. For the first time in his ruthless, blood-soaked life, the great Arthur Blackwood looked completely and utterly dumbfounded. I stood my ground, crossing my arms. It was time to show the Mafia how modern dentistry was really done. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, nobody breathed. I was fairly certain the head surgeon behind me had actually passed out his knees, giving way with a soft thud against the Persian rug. Arthur Blackwood stared at me, the barrel of his silver revolver still aimed squarely at my sternum. I stared right back, offering him the dead-eyed, exhausted look of a medical resident who had worked a 36-hour shift on Thanksgiving with no overtime pay. Slowly, miraculously, Arthur lowered the gun. He tilted his handsome head, his dark eyes narrowing into dangerous, calculating slits. "A tooth," he rasped. "You're telling me this entire agony is a single tooth? An impacted third molar, specifically." I corrected, stepping forward and swatting away the trembling hand of a bodyguard who tried to hold me back. "It is trying to erupt, but there is no room in your jaw. The gum tissue over it is inflamed, infected, and pressing right against your trigeminal nerve. It is called pericoronitis. And unless you want the infection to spread to your neck and actually kill you, I need to take it out. Right now." Arthur evaluated me, searching for any sign of hesitation or deception. Finally, he uncocked the gun and tossed it carelessly onto a glass coffee table. "You have 1 hour. If I am still in pain after that, I will personally throw you off this balcony." "Deal," I said, immediately rolling up my sleeves. "Now, kick these quacks out. Get me a sterile surgical kit from their bags, a heavy-duty dental elevator forceps, and the strongest bottle of whiskey you have in that ridiculous bar." Within 5 minutes, the useless medical board was escorted out, and I had my makeshift dental station set up. Arthur was seated in a plush, reclining leather armchair that probably cost more than a sports car, looking like a brooding king waiting for an assassination rather than a surgical procedure. I snapped a pair of latex gloves onto my hands with a sharp, professional snapping sound. I poured a generous amount of 50-year-old single malt scotch into a glass and shoved it toward him. "Rinse and spit, then drink the rest. We don't have proper local anesthesia, so you are going to have to do this the old-fashioned way." Arthur threw the liquor back without flinching. "I've taken bullets, doctor. A tooth is nothing." "Sure, boss, whatever you say," I muttered, picking up the gleaming steel dental elevator. The moment the metal caught the chandelier's light, the terrifying, cold-blooded Mafia boss visibly stiffened. His broad shoulders locked up, and I swore I saw a bead of cold sweat form at his temple. Oh, classic. I had seen this 100 times in my past life. The bigger the guy, the bigger the baby they were in the dental chair. "Open wide," I commanded, holding a sterile gauze pad. Arthur opened his mouth, his jaw tense enough to snap a crowbar. I leaned in, ignoring the fact that I was basically sticking my fingers into the maw of a billionaire predator, and got to work. The extraction was frankly a masterpiece. Despite the lack of an X-ray, my hands remembered the muscle memory. I wedged the elevator, applied leverage, and grabbed the surgical forceps. "You might feel a little pressure," I lied smoothly. A loud crunching sound echoed in the room. Arthur Blackwood, the scourge of the New York underworld, let out a high-pitched, muffled squeak that sounded suspiciously like a stepped-on dog toy. His large hands gripped the armrests so hard the expensive leather actually tore. "And done," I announced triumphantly, holding up the bloody, jagged piece of calcium with my forceps. "Congratulations, boss. You've been exorcised." Arthur panted his chest, heaving his eyes wide as he stared at the offending tooth. Then, almost instantly, the tension drained from his face. The agonizing pressure that had plagued him for days vanished. He slumped back into the chair, the sheer relief washing over him like a tidal wave. Within 3 minutes, the feared Mafia boss was fast asleep, snoring softly through the gauze I had packed into his mouth. I washed my hands, entirely satisfied with myself. Another victory for modern dentistry. However, my triumph was incredibly short-lived. Over the next 2 weeks, the aftermath of the historic extraction took a bizarre turn. I had saved the boss's life, or at least his sanity, which meant I was instantly promoted. I was no longer a lowly medical assistant, I was now the chief medical officer of the Blackwood Empire, complete with a corner office, a private lab, and a salary with way too many zeros. But there was a catch. The terrifying Arthur Blackwood had developed a weird, slightly psychotic clinging habit. It started subtly. He would summon me to the penthouse at 10 p.m. for routine post-op checkups, but his gums were healing perfectly. Then I noticed my spare white lab coats disappearing from my office hooks. The mystery was solved one evening when I walked into his private suite unannounced to drop off some medical supply requisition forms. Arthur was asleep on his massive king-sized bed. He was clutching my missing freshly laundered lab coat like a giant heavily armed teddy bear, his face buried deep into the collar where the smell of medical-grade antiseptic and my mint toothpaste lingered. It turned out the big bad Mafia boss had unconsciously associated the smell of my clinical hygiene with the absolute cessation of his pain and safety. He literally couldn't sleep without it. "Dr. Luke," Arthur murmured sleepily as I tried to slowly back out of the room. He sat up, his dark eyes instantly locking onto me with the focused, unblinking intensity of a predator who had found his favorite prey. "My jaw aches. Come here and check it." I sighed, adjusting my glasses. His jaw was fine. He knew it. I knew it. But looking at the ruthless billionaire wrapping his hands possessively around the hem of my coat, I realized I hadn't just secured a high-paying job. I had traded the threat of cement shoes for a gilded, mint-scented cage. I stood in the center of the mahogany-paneled executive suite, holding a plastic anatomical model of a human jaw in one hand and a neon green toothbrush in the other. Across the room, Arthur Blackwood, the man who supposedly controlled half the politicians and all the illicit trade in the state of New York, sat behind his desk looking like a scolded toddler. "I don't care if you're stressed, boss," I said, slamming a confiscated box of gourmet glazed donuts into the trash can. "Sugar is a breeding ground for Streptococcus mutans. Do you want another impacted molar? Do you want to go through that kind of swelling again, Floss? Every single night, and absolutely no midnight sweets." Arthur crossed his massive arms, his tailored suit stretching dangerously at his broad shoulders. He fixed me with a glare that would have made a cartel leader wet his pants. "I am the head of the Blackwood family. I do not take orders in my own building, Dr. Luke. If I want a donut at 2 in the morning, I will have a donut. If you eat a donut at 2 in the morning, I will personally replace your imported toothpaste with wasabi," I countered without missing a single beat. I tossed a spool of mint-flavored dental floss onto his desk. It bounced off his gold-plated pen holder. "Up and down, forming a C shape around the tooth. Do it." Arthur stared at the floss like it was a live grenade. He looked at me, realizing I was entirely serious and entirely unafraid of his Mafia aura, then let out a heavy, dramatic sigh that sounded like a dying dragon. Grumbling under his breath, in rapid-fire Italian, the terrifying billionaire picked up the floss and stomped off toward his private ensuite bathroom to clean his teeth. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Managing a Mafia boss was surprisingly similar to managing a stubborn 7-year-old in a pediatric dental clinic. The sheer absurdity of my life didn't end there. In a strange, twisted turn of events, my successful exorcism of Arthur's wisdom tooth had turned me into a messiah among the Blackwood Empire's elite medical staff. The following Tuesday, I was forced to sit in on a high-level corporate board meeting to provide a medical wellness update. Arthur was at the head of the long glass table, flanked by intimidating underbosses and cutthroat financial advisors. To my left sat Dr. Sterling, the head surgeon who had previously cried on the Persian rug during Act 1 of my new life. He was currently holding a leather-bound notebook staring at me with the shining, reverent eyes of a hardcore fanboy. And regarding the restructuring of the downtown shipping ports, one of the gruff capos rumbled, sliding a classified folder across the table. "We need to aggressively extract the rival elements before the end of the fiscal quarter." Dr. Sterling immediately leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles with absolute gravity. "Ah, yes. an aggressive extraction, much like a complicated surgical removal of an impacted third molar. We must proceed with caution, gentlemen, to ensure we do not sever the metaphorical trigeminal nerve of our logistics network. The entire table of hardened criminals nodded in solemn agreement. Another old medical professor chimed in, totally deadpan. Indeed, we must apply routine scaling and route planing to our financial records. We cannot allow the calculus of tax evasion to build up and cause severe periodontitis in our offshore accounts. I choked on my coffee, covering my mouth as a violent coughing fit seized me. Arthur didn't even blink. He simply reached over, patted my back with a heavy, warm hand, and said to the board, "Excellent points. Make sure our operations are as clean as Dr. Luke's sterilized instruments." I stared at the ceiling, silently begging the universe to give me strength. They were treating basic dentistry like Sun Tzu's The Art of War. But as the weeks blurred into months, the comedic absurdity began to peel back, revealing the bruised, complicated reality underneath. I discovered Arthur's hidden stash of sweets wasn't just a random craving. Late one rainy night, I found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring out at the slick, neon-lit city. He was slowly chewing on a piece of caramel, his expression dark, guarded, and incredibly weary. Through casual, careful conversations over the weeks, I learned that sugar was his only coping mechanism. Growing up in the blood-soaked, treacherous environment of the underworld, he was never allowed to show weakness, fear, or exhaustion. A piece of candy in the dark was the only comfort a young, terrified Arthur had ever known. Looking at his broad back silhouetted against the New York skyline, I suddenly didn't see the ruthless boss anymore. I saw a giant, love-starved kid who was carrying the crushing weight of a violent empire on his shoulders. "You're going to rot your enamel," I said softly, stepping into the room. Arthur didn't turn around, but his shoulders relaxed instantly at the sound of my voice. "Just one, Luke. It has been a long day." I didn't confiscate the candy this time. Instead, I grabbed a stack of medical inventory reports, sat on the plush sofa near his desk, and started reading. "Eat your caramel, boss, but you're brushing for a full 3 minutes tonight. I'm timing you." A soft, genuine chuckle rumbled in Arthur's chest. He walked over, settling into the armchair opposite me. The storm battered the windows, but inside the room was quiet and warm. Hours passed. The drone of the rain and the exhaustion of the day finally caught up with me. The words on the inventory reports began to blur, and before I knew it, my head slumped against the armrest, pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up several hours later to the soft gray light of dawn creeping through the glass. I was still on the sofa, but the chill of the air-conditioned room was gone. I looked down. Draped carefully over my shoulders, tucking me in like a cocoon, was Arthur's bespoke, ridiculously expensive suit jacket. It smelled faintly of gunmetal expensive cologne and the unmistakable clean scent of mint toothpaste. Across the room, Arthur was asleep at his desk, his head resting on his folded arms facing my direction. I pulled the jacket a little tighter around myself, a strange fluttery feeling blooming in my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with cardiology. The boundary between a captive employee and a terrifying boss was melting, and honestly, I didn't know how to stop it. Nor I realized with a mild sense of panic, did I want to. The universe has a funny way of trying to force a derailed plot back onto its original tracks. I realized this on a Friday evening during a ridiculously lavish charity gala hosted by the mayor of New York. As the chief medical officer and Arthur's unofficial highly paid babysitter, I was standing by the mahogany bar sipping sparkling water while Arthur dealt with the politicians. Enter Chloe, the mayor's daughter, and the original female protagonist of whatever cursed novel I had transmigrated into. She looked like a walking cliché delicate, wearing a flowing white gown and carrying a vintage porcelain teacup on a silver saucer. She glided up to Arthur, batting her eyelashes with practiced innocence. "Mr. Blackwood," she cooed, her voice practically dripping with artificial sweetness. "I heard about your terrible migraines and the stress you carry. My family brought this special ancient herbal tea from the East. It's a miracle worker for the nerves. Please drink it and let your pain wash away." Arthur looked at the cup, his face an impassive, icy mask. In the original plot, this was the moment she hooked him. The tea was laced with highly addictive sedatives and trace heavy metals designed to make the ruthless boss dependent on her family's cures. I didn't even think. My medical instincts hijacked my brain. I marched across the ballroom floor, snatched the porcelain cup right out of her manicured hands, and dumped the contents straight into a potted ficus. "Hey!" Chloe gasped, dropping her angelic facade for a split second. "What do you think you're doing?" I glared at her, pulling out a pen light from my breast pocket and shining it accusingly at the remaining dregs in the cup. "What am I doing? I'm saving his gastrointestinal tract. Do you have any idea what's in this? It smells like unprocessed valerian root mixed with questionable alkaloids. Are you actively trying to destroy his enamel-induce acute liver failure and throw him into a coma? If you want to poison the boss, at least consult a pharmacist first." The music stopped. The mayor went purple. Arthur, however, looked at me, a dangerous, thrilled smirk playing on his lips. Needless to say, we left the gala early. But the mayor's faction didn't take kindly to a lowly doctor ruining their hostile takeover of the Blackwood Empire. They decided to retaliate. 2 nights later, I was alone in my private clinic on the 40th floor of the Blackwood Tower, updating digital dental records. The building was supposed to be a fortress, but when the glass of my clinic door quietly shattered and a man in tactical gear stepped in with a suppressed pistol raised, I realized the plot was fighting back hard. According to the original storyline, Arthur was a paranoid, suspicious tyrant. If someone broke into his tower, he would coldly observe from the security cameras to see if the target was a traitor or a liability. But the universe clearly hadn't factored in the power of a man who had his wisdom tooth extracted. Before the assassin could even cock his weapon, the reinforced double doors of my clinic were kicked off their hinges with the force of a localized earthquake. Arthur Blackwood stormed in. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He was in a black dress shirt sleeves rolled up, looking like the absolute incarnation of death. The assassin pivoted, aiming the gun at Arthur. "Blackwood!" Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't even draw his own weapon. He lunged. The sheer terrifying brutality of the Mafia boss was unleashed in a blur of motion. He disarmed the assassin in a second, slamming the man's head into the reception desk, then throwing him onto the floor. Arthur mounted him, his fists raining down with sickening rhythmic impacts. "You point a gun at him!" Arthur roared, his voice tearing through the clinic like a wild animal's. "You dare point a gun at my doctor!" The assassin was unconscious after the third punch, but Arthur wasn't stopping. His knuckles were bloody, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. He was going to beat the man to death right on my sterile linoleum floor. "Boss?" I stepped forward, stepping carefully over the shattered glass, and tapped him lightly on his broad, heaving shoulder. "Arthur, stop." He froze, his fist suspended in the air. "If you keep hitting him, blood splatter is going to get on my lab coat," I said, pragmatically gesturing to my pristine white uniform. "And biostains are notoriously hard to wash out of this fabric. Also, the paperwork for a homicide in a medical facility is a nightmare. Let the cleanup crew handle him." Arthur slowly lowered his fist. He stood up, chest rising and falling heavily, his frame practically vibrating with leftover adrenaline. He looked at the unconscious assassin, then at my clean coat. And then, without any warning, he stepped forward and crushed me against his chest. His arms wrapped around me so tightly it knocked the wind out of my lungs. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, his massive body actually trembling against mine. "Listen to me," Arthur snarled, though the threat wasn't directed at me. He raised his head, glaring at the security cameras in the corners of the room that broadcast directly to the underground capos. "Anyone who touches him is dead. Anyone who looks at him wrong is dead. Dr. Luke belongs to me. He is the untouchable property of the Blackwood Empire. Property I should have been offended. I should have pushed him away and lectured him on basic human rights and HR violations. But as I stood there, trapped in the crushing, frantic embrace of New York's most dangerous predator, I didn't feel scared. I felt the furious racing beat of his heart against my chest. And to my absolute horror, I realized my own heart was beating just as frantically in response. It wasn't the adrenaline of the assassination attempt. It was the sudden, overwhelming realization of his absolute maddening dependence on me. I slowly raised my arms and awkwardly patted his back. Okay, boss. No one's touching me. Just please don't wrinkle the coat." For a man who had successfully diagnosed and treated hundreds of complex oral pathologies, I was woefully unequipped to handle my own cardiovascular anomalies. My heart rate had been dangerously erratic ever since Arthur Blackwood crushed me against his chest in the middle of a shattered clinic. I diagnosed myself with acute tachycardia, but no EKG could explain why my pulse spiked exclusively when a certain billionaire mafia boss looked at me. I was experiencing a severe textbook case of gay panic, and as a medical professional, I knew the best treatment for panic was isolation and a controlled environment. So I did what any rational doctor would do. I submitted a formal bureaucratic request for 1 week of paid time off due to occupational burnout, packed my bags, and fled the opulent Blackwood Tower for my small private apartment clinic in Brooklyn. I needed distance to reset my clinical detachment. I needed to remember that I was an employee and he was the emperor of New York's underworld. Unfortunately, my departure sent the Blackwood Empire into a state of absolute unhinged chaos. By day 3 of my vacation, my phone was practically melting from encrypted text messages. Dr. Sterling, the head surgeon, sent me a frantic voice note sounding on the verge of tears. "Dr. Luke, I am begging you to return. The boss has lost his mind. He has instituted a code red no-teeth protocol." I had stared at my phone in blank confusion until one of the senior capos, a heavily tattooed man named Vinny, discreetly texted me a photo from a high-level syndicate meeting. It was a picture of a dozen hardened, terrifying Mafia bosses sitting around a mahogany table, all wearing light blue surgical masks. Arthur, in a fit of irrational possessive separation, anxiety had apparently decided that if his personal dentist wasn't around to look at teeth, then no one was allowed to show their teeth. He had strictly forbidden anyone in the tower from smiling, laughing, or opening their mouths wider than strictly necessary. Anyone who violated the rule was threatened with immediate reassignment to the sanitation docks. The ruthless boss of New York was throwing the most terrifying, bizarre temper tantrum in Mafia history, all because his dentist took a sick day. I was rubbing my temples trying to process the sheer absurdity of it all when a massive thunderstorm rolled over the city. Rain lashed against the windows of my Brooklyn clinic in heavy, angry sheets. It was nearly midnight. I was sitting at my desk reviewing old dental charts and trying to convince myself I was just a normal guy when a heavy, deliberate knock echoed from my reinforced glass door. I grabbed my emergency flashlight and walked over expecting a late-night patient with a chipped veneer. I unlocked the door and my breath hitched. Arthur Blackwood was standing under the awning. The billionaire who commanded fleets of luxury cars and an army of bodyguards was completely alone. He was wearing a dark trench coat soaked to the bone. He held a custom-made umbrella in his right hand, but he hadn't even bothered to open it. Water dripped from his raven hair, trailing down his sharp jawline. He looked terrifying, pathetic, and devastatingly handsome all at once, like a lethal stray Doberman left out in a hurricane. "Do you actively want to catch pneumonia, boss?" I blurted out, my doctor's instincts immediately overriding my panic. "Get inside before you ruin my floor." Arthur stepped into the clinic. He didn't look at the medical equipment or the modest surroundings. His dark, intense eyes were entirely locked onto me, burning with a raw, agonizing vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "You left," he said. His voice was a low, rough rasp that vibrated in the quiet room. I took my legally mandated PTO. I corrected, grabbing a clean towel from a sterilized cabinet and tossing it at him. "You approved it." He caught the towel but didn't use it. "I knew it would happen eventually." Arthur murmured, water dripping from his coat onto the linoleum. He took a step closer, his massive frame towering over me. "I lost control that night. I beat a man half to death right in front of you. My world is built on blood and violence, Luke. I tried to keep it away from you, but you saw it. I knew my reality would disgust you." I stared at the most feared man in the American criminal underworld, who was currently shivering in my foyer, genuinely believing he had scared me away. I let out a long, heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Arthur, I am a maxillofacial surgeon. I literally cut open human gums, drill into bone, and extract impacted teeth with metal pliers while blood gets everywhere. Do you honestly think a bloody nose and a fistfight scare me?" Arthur froze. He blinked, the terrifying Mafia aura completely evaporating into pure confusion. "Then why did you run away?" I felt a violent flush creep up my neck. I looked away, suddenly very interested in the tile patterns on the floor. "Because," I admitted, my voice dropping to a muttered grumble, "my cardiovascular system was deeply compromised. My resting heart rate spiked to 120 beats per minute when you hugged me, and I couldn't figure out if it was an arrhythmia or something else. I needed a minute to panic about it. In peace, you idiot." A deafening silence fell over the clinic. I could hear the rain pounding against the glass. When I finally gathered the courage to look up, Arthur was staring at me. The sheer, breathless awe on his face was blinding. The storm in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by a deep, consuming warmth that threatened to swallow me whole. He dropped his umbrella. "Oh." Arthur breathed out a slow, devastatingly beautiful smile, finally breaking across his face, a smile that, ironically, he had banned the rest of his empire from mimicking. "Don't look at me like that," I grumbled, grabbing the towel from his hands. I stepped right into his personal space, throwing the thick fabric over his wet hair, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of professional distance. "Sit down on the patient chair. You're getting my floor wet, and I'm not dealing with a mafia boss who has the sniffles." Arthur didn't argue. He let me drag him by the lapels of his wet coat, sitting down obediently. As I stood over him, roughly drying his hair, while his strong arms wrapped securely around my waist, pulling me close, I knew one thing for certain. My PTO was officially canceled and my heart rate was never going back to normal. I am a board-certified oral and maxillofacial surgeon. I spent years studying bone grafts, jaw reconstruction, and complex dental impactions. I did not spend 8 years in medical school to become the head toxicologist for a mafia syndicate. Yet somehow, the universe refused to respect my credentials. The crisis hit on a bustling Saturday night at the Blackwood Empire's crown jewel, a massive, ultra-luxurious casino in Manhattan. A rival family desperately trying to cripple Arthur's revenue had managed to slip a potent, fast-acting neurotoxin into the VIP lounge's vintage champagne supply. When I was dragged out of bed and rushed to the casino floor by Arthur's frantic security team, the scene was absolute pandemonium. High rollers and top-tier capos were collapsing over baccarat tables, clutching their stomachs and frothing at the mouth. The on-site medics were running around like headless chickens, panicking about voodoo poison. I took one look at the pinpoint pupils, the excessive salivation, and the muscle tremors of the fallen capos, and let out an exasperated sigh. "It is an organophosphate compound, you absolute morons," I yelled over the chaos, snapping on a pair of black latex gloves. "It is practically high-grade pesticide. Stop praying and get me every vial of atropine and pralidoxim in the emergency stash. And somebody hook up IV lines before these guys aspirate on their own vomit." For the next 2 hours, the VIP lounge turned into my personal emergency room. I barked orders, jammed needles into tattooed arms, and stabilized over a dozen men. By the time the sun began to rise, the crisis was entirely averted. No casualties. As I sat on a velvet stool at the bar, peeling off my gloves and drinking a glass of ice water, the attitude of the Blackwood Empire shifted permanently. Vinny, the hulking underboss, walked up to me with tears in his bruised eyes and bowed a full 90 degrees. I was no longer just the boss's favorite dentist. I was a god in a white coat. "You saved the family, Doc," Vinny choked out, looking at me like I was the second coming. "We would take a bullet for you, any day, anywhere." I just waved him off, too tired to explain basic pharmacology. "Just brush your teeth twice a day, Vinny. That's all the repayment I need." Arthur, however, had a very different idea of how to reward me. That evening, I was ordered to put on a tailored suit that had magically appeared in my closet. A sleek, bulletproof Rolls-Royce picked me up and drove me to a 3-star Michelin restaurant overlooking Central Park. When I stepped inside, the place was completely empty save for a terrified-looking string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. Arthur had bought out the entire establishment for the night. He was waiting for me at a candle-lit table, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. The terrifying, blood-soaked mafia boss who usually commanded armies now looked strangely tense. His jaw was clenched, and his fingers were drumming a rhythmic, anxious beat against the pristine white tablecloth. We ate a 5-course meal featuring ingredients I couldn't even pronounce. It was phenomenal, but the tension in the air was so thick, I could have cut it with a surgical scalpel. Finally, as the waiter cleared our dessert plates and practically sprinted back to the kitchen, Arthur stood up. He walked around the table, stopping right in front of my chair. And then the undisputed king of the New York underworld, a man who bowed to no one, a man who broke bones and toppled empires without breaking a sweat, slowly dropped to one knee. I froze my glass of sparkling water hovering halfway to my mouth. I genuinely thought he had dropped a napkin. "Boss, did you lose something? Is your knee acting up?" "Luke, shut up and let me speak." Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver straight down my spine. He looked up at me, his dark eyes entirely stripped of their usual icy armor. There was no mafia aura. There was only raw, absolute devotion. I have spent my entire life building an empire built on fear. Arthur began, his voice surprisingly steady. I have wealth, I have power, and I have a city that trembles when I walk. But none of it meant a damn thing until a reckless, foul-mouthed doctor shoved a metal tool into my mouth and yelled at me for eating donuts. I felt my face heat up, a violent flush spreading across my cheeks. Arthur, let me finish. He insisted, reaching out to gently take both of my hands in his large, scarred ones. You didn't just extract a tooth, Luke. You extracted the poison from my life. You look at me, and you don't see a monster, you see a patient who needs to floss. You are the only clean, pure thing in my world. He took a deep breath, his grip tightening. My life, this empire, my fortune, and my teeth, they are all yours. I am entirely, irrevocably in love with you. Be mine. Officially. Then the feared Mafia boss narrowed his eyes, adding a completely unhinged, deadly serious threat. And if you dare say no, Luke, I swear to God, I will buy a 5-pound bag of gummy bears tonight. I will eat them all, I won't brush my teeth, and I will let the cavities rot my jaw until I die. For a moment, the Michelin-starred restaurant was dead silent. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing, staring at us in sheer, paralyzed shock. I looked at the billionaire kneeling before me, holding my hands like they were holy relics threatening self-harm via sugar out of pure romantic desperation. A bubble of laughter burst from my chest. I laughed so hard my shoulders shook, all the tension and gay panic of the past few weeks dissolving into the sheer, brilliant absurdity of the man I had fallen for. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatically throw my arms around his neck. Instead, I reached down, grabbed the lapels of his insanely expensive charcoal suit, and hoisted him up from the floor. I pulled his face down to my level, our noses almost brushing. You listen to me. Arthur Blackwood, I whispered, a massive grinning smirk on my face. You try getting a single cavity, and I won't just extract the tooth. I will ban you from anesthesia for a year. Arthur's breath hitched. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face, mirroring mine. Is that a yes, doctor? That is a clinical diagnosis of a permanent partnership, boss, I replied. I closed the remaining distance, crashing my lips against his. The kiss wasn't a tentative, delicate thing. It was demanding, warm, and tasted faintly of expensive wine and the undeniable spark of a completely derailed plotline. His arms banded around my waist, lifting me effortlessly off my feet, holding me like I was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. The boundaries were gone. The boss and the doctor were dead. There was only us and the absolute certainty that the New York underworld was never ever going to be the same. 3 years is a long time in the criminal underworld. Historically, it was enough time for 3 regime changes, a dozen bloody turf wars, and a minimum of 5 dramatic betrayals. But under the undisputed reign of Arthur Blackwood and his fiercely pragmatic chief medical officer, the New York Syndicate had experienced a terrifying era of unprecedented, squeaky clean stability. The Blackwood Empire had expanded, exponentially dominating both legitimate logistics and the city's shadowed corners. But the most drastic change wasn't the profit margins, it was the culture. To put it bluntly, the hardened criminals of New York were no longer afraid of the FBI rival cartels or the threat of a cement shoe fitting in the Hudson River. They were, however, utterly terrified of their biannual dental checkups. I swear to God, Doc Vinny, the 6'4", heavily tattooed capo of the docks, whimpered from the reclining leather patient chair. He was clutching a disposable paper bib like it was a shield. I've been flossing twice a day. Even when we were doing that hostile takeover in Queens, I brought my travel-sized mouthwash. I adjusted my surgical mask, holding a sharp dental explorer probe under the harsh overhead clinical light. I squinted at his lower incisors, offering him a flat, unimpressed glare over the rim of my protective glasses. Vinny, your gums are inflamed, and I am looking at a very suspicious buildup of plaque on your bicuspids, I said, strictly, my voice echoing in the state-of-the-art clinic located on the 50th floor of the Blackwood Tower. Are you lying to the consort of the Blackwood family? Because if you are, I am going to have to tell the boss that his top lieutenant is at risk for early-stage gingivitis. Vinny went completely pale, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. No, please, Dr. Luke. Don't tell the boss. He'll put me on desk duty. He will make me drink kale smoothies again. Then you will schedule a deep scaling and a route planing for next Tuesday, and you will lay off the sugary espresso drinks. I commanded, lowering the probe and peeling off my gloves. Dismissed. The hulking mobster practically sprinted out of the clinic, bowing respectfully on his way out. As the reinforced glass doors slid shut behind him, they immediately hissed open again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop the air, growing thick with an oppressive, undeniable aura of absolute power. Arthur Blackwood walked in. At 32, Arthur was the undisputed godfather of the East Coast. He was dressed in a bespoke three-piece midnight blue suit, a heavy gold watch glinting on his wrist. He looked like the physical embodiment of danger and wealth, the kind of man who could collapse a Fortune 500 company with a single phone call. He locked the clinic door behind him, walked over to the sterilized tray, and completely bypassed it. Instead, the terrifying billionaire dropped his intimidating Mafia persona, instantly stepped into my personal space, and wrapped his massive arms around my waist. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling the scent of my medical-grade soap with a contented sigh. "My jaw feels a little tight today. Doctor," Arthur murmured against my skin, his deep voice vibrating right into my chest. "I think I need a thorough, highly invasive medical examination." I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't stop the fond smile from tugging at the corners of my mouth. I reached up, threading my fingers through his perfectly styled dark hair. "Your jaw is in the top 1 percentile of human structural perfection, Arthur. You had a panoramic X-ray literally last month. You don't need an exam, you just want an excuse to slack off from your board meeting." "The board meeting is boring," he grumbled, lifting his head to look down at me. His dark eyes, which struck terror into the hearts of senators and mob bosses alike, were soft, warm, and brimming with ridiculous, overflowing affection. "I would rather be here being yelled at by my husband." I laughed, leaning up to press a quick, mint-flavored kiss to his jaw. It was still surreal to think about how drastically my life had veered off course. The toxic, melodramatic web novel I had been dumped into was completely dead and buried. Chloe, the original protagonist, had married a minor tech CEO and moved to Silicon Valley after realizing the ruthless villain of New York was entirely immune to her herbal teas and fake tears. Looking at Arthur, I realized the core truth of our bizarre romance. True love in this world wasn't about dramatic, blood-soaked salvation or toxic power plays. It wasn't about curing a magical curse or sacrificing everything for a tragic plotline. Sometimes love was just the quiet, stubborn dedication to curing the small, everyday pains, so the person you cared about could finally sleep soundly at night. Later that evening, we stood on the expansive balcony of the penthouse, the glittering, sprawling skyline of Manhattan spread out beneath us like a blanket of diamonds. The cool night wind rustled through my hair. Arthur stood beside me, looking devastatingly handsome under the moonlight. In his hand was a small porcelain plate holding a single meticulously portioned slice of red velvet cake. He took a bite, chewing slowly, savoring the sugar with a look of pure, unadulterated bliss. "It's good," I asked, leaning my back against the glass railing, watching him with an amused smirk. Incredible," Arthur replied. He set the plate down on a nearby patio table and stepped closer, trapping me between the railing and his warm, solid body. "But not the best thing I've tasted today." "Flattery won't save you from the bathroom sink, boss," I whispered, reaching up to adjust the lapels of his suit. "You have exactly 10 minutes to finish that cake, and then you are brushing for a full 3 minutes. I will be timing you with a stopwatch." Arthur chuckled, a deep, rich sound that made my heart skip a beat, even after 3 years. "Only if you supervise me, doctor." He leaned down, capturing my lips in a slow, sweet, and lingering kiss that tasted of rich chocolate and an undeniable happily ever after. As I closed my eyes, melting into the embrace of New York's most dangerous man, I decided that being transmigrated wasn't a tragedy at all, because sometimes if you bring a sturdy pair of dental forceps to a mafia war, you get to write your own perfect ending.